Hey there, in this video we are going to look at how we convert decimals into fractions. So converting from decimal to fraction can be done without a calculator and technically without memorizing, but it can be a tedious process to go through, especially if you're working with larger numbers and maybe especially if you don't know your multiplication or division facts as easily. So keep in mind memorizing is going to save you a little bit more time, especially if you can memorize those more common decimal and fraction conversions back and forth. So we are going to look at a couple examples of how to convert from a decimal to a fraction. So I have 3 examples for you and just a quick breakdown of what those steps will look like. We will start by writing down the decimal divided by 1. So for example, a number 1.75 over 1. And then we are going to multiply the top and the bottom by 10 for every number after the decimal point. So for example, just like when we converted from fraction to decimal, we're looking at how many numbers are after the decimal point, and that's going to help us figure out what we multiply by. So here there are 2 numbers after the decimal point, so we are going to multiply by 1 followed by 2 zeros because there are 2 numbers after the decimal point, or in other words, multiply by 100. And if we multiply by 100, that's going to move that decimal over to the right 2 places. So again, however many decimal digits, that's how many zeros, and the number that we're multiplying by, 10, 100, 1000, 10,000, so on and so on. So when we do 0.75 times 100, that's going to be 75. And then on the bottom is just going to be the number you multiplied by, because 1 times 100 is 100. So as a fraction, we have 75 over 100. Now, we are not going to leave that as is. We have to see if it can be simplified. If it can't, then that would be your answer. But in this case, both of these can be divided by 25 on top and on bottom. So when we divide 75 by 25, we get 3. When we divide 100 by 25, we get 4. And so that is your final answer. So our simplified fraction for 0.75 would be 3/4. Now, this is a good example, especially of a common one that you would want to memorize as opposed to going through that process to rewrite it as a fraction with these steps. So let's take a look at number 2. Notice with this one, we see 2.35. So this is a number over 1. So it has a number higher than 1 before the decimal point, and we have some decimal digits afterwards as well. So if I go ahead and write this over 1 using those same steps, we are still going to look at just the decimal digits. So there are 2 decimal digits. So just like on the last one, we are going to multiply the top by 100 and the bottom by 100, because that's going to move the decimal point to the right 2 spaces to give us 235 on top and then 100 on bottom. Now, once we've done that, again, just like on the last one, we want to see what can both of these to be divided by. Now, 25 won't go into 235, so we can't use that. But I noticed that both of these end with either a 5 or a 0. So if you know those divisibility rules, then you know you can divide each of these by 5. And even if that isn't the biggest number you can divide by, if you can at least start somewhere, you can get smaller numbers to work with and then continue to divide from there if needed. So 235 divided by 5, if I don't know that in my head and I can't figure that out in my head, then I can write out my long division. So 235 divided by 5. 5 doesn't go into 2, but it does go into 23. It goes into 23 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20. Subtract and you get 3. Bring down the 5. 5 goes into 35 7 times. 7 times 5 is 35. Subtract and we get 0. So we've used all our numbers and the remainder is 0. So 235 is divisible by 5. We get 47 when we divide by 5. So our top is going to be 47. And then 100 divided by 5 is 20. If you don't know that, you could go through your long division process as well for that. So 47 over 20, you'd want to check to make sure that you fully simplified it. 47 is not divisible by any number other than 1 in comparison or in common with the 20. So this is our simplified fraction. So let's take a look at one more. This one, notice 0.256. First of all, we have a 0 beforehand. So it is going to be a fraction, not an improper fraction like the last one, because the last one had 2.35, so it was higher than 1, so it was an improper fraction answer. This one will not be improper. It will just be a general fraction. We have 3 decimal points this time. So when we write it over 1 and then figure out what we multiply by, we're going to multiply by 1 and then 3 zeros this time, so 1,000, because there are 3 decimal points, so 3 zeros. That's going to move it over 3 to the right. So that gives us 256 over 1,000. Now you have a few options here. If you know that 1,000 is divisible by 8, then you can go ahead and do divided by 8 on both of these. If you don't know that, then you could start with, for example, a 2, because they're both even. Divide by 2 and you'll get it down to 128 over 500. And then you could divide by 2 again, or you could divide by 4. You have a few options if you don't know your facts. As long as you can see when it's even, we can at least divide by that 2. Now I'm going to go ahead and use 8 since I know that 1,000 is divisible by 8. I get 125. I'm going to go ahead and try 256 and see if it's divisible by 8 as well. So when I divide by 8, 8 doesn't go into 2, but it does go into 25. 3 times. There we go. 3 times 8 is 24. Subtract down and we get 1. Bring the 6 down. 8 goes into 16 exactly 2 times. So when we do that, we're left with a remainder of 0. So 32 is going to be the number on top. So 32 over 125 would be simplified all the way. You can check through your factors to make sure that there's nothing else they're both divisible by, but that will be your fully simplified fraction for 2.256 written in fraction form. So just as a quick reminder, and I'm going to use the 0.75 as a visual example, when we work through going from a decimal to a fraction, always write it over 1, figure out how many decimal digits there are, multiply by whatever number is 1 and that many zeros, so 2 zeros because 2 decimal digits, so we multiply by 100. Once you do that, we get 75 over 100, for example. Once we've done step 1 and 2, then we simplify the fraction as possible. When we did this one, we divided by 25, and then we ended up with 3/4. So again, the process is a little bit tedious and will take up some time. So if you are able to memorize some of those more common conversions from fraction to decimal or decimal to fraction, that will save you a little bit of time in the long run.